Welcome to the basics, where I will go through the equipment, the crew skills, the consumables, and the field mods on general usage throughout the different classes in the game. This is going to be aimed at newer players who don't know as much, but also returning players if they're coming back, and you might not know about the different slot bonuses that are in the game now, or even the new equipment in general. So starting out, the slot bonuses, you are first going to get one slot bonus depending on what the tank class is. For heavy tanks, it is the survivability slot. For medium tanks, it is the mobility slot. For tank destroyers, it is the firepower slot. For light tanks, it's obviously scouting. And for SPGs, it is the firepower slot. Now, the way that this slot bonus works is that when you click on it, you can get to choose your different equipment types. Now, up here on the top, next to where it says equipment, you can actually choose the different categories, obviously being firepower, survivability, mobility, and scouting. And if you know, for example, this one survivability, you can then click it and it will show you everything that will then get the bonus if it's put into this slot. If we hover over it, you will see the bonus characteristics, where on the left-hand side, you have the flat-out bonus where it's just not in the correct slot. But if it is in the correct slot, on the right-hand side, you will see that bonus there. Obviously, the piece of equipment is going to be useful for that slot bonus. There's no point of having a slot bonus when, oh, it's a turbo in survivability. It's not going to work like that. However, one equipment piece that is always going to work no matter what slot you put it in, and it will always receive the bonus, is vents. It doesn't matter whether it's in firepower, survivability, doesn't care. It is always going to receive its 1% bonus added on top, as long as it is in a designated slot. Now, you might see that I have two designated slots. So on the 50B, for example, I have survivability, and I also have a mobility slot. This is to do with field mods, which you can access on the top right. And once you're in here, you will see that you can assign the field mod down here. You do need to get up to tier 6 on the field mods, so this is only available for tier 8 to tier 10 vehicles. And depending on the class, it is going to vary on what you can choose. For heavy tanks, you will be able to choose between mobility and firepower, and this second slot provides exactly the same bonuses as if it was in the first slot. So that means, for example, on the 50B, we can choose HP boost and get the 10% there, and then on the second slot, we can then choose turbo, and we will get the bonuses on top. As you can see, if we hover over it, we're getting the full bonuses, as you can see. You can even kind of see as well, if we go off of this, and then we change slot, you'll see that they change. So as soon as we go here, you'll see that turbo changes to plus 10% engine power, but if we clicked off of it, it would only get 7.5% in that slot. And depending upon what class you are using, obviously with the 121B, it is a medium tank. If we go into up here again, we can then choose between scouting and survivability. And the exact same thing goes for the tank destroyers. It is scouting and survivability. For light tanks, it is mobility and firepower. And for SPGs, it is scouting and survivability. So make sure that you are utilizing the correct equipment slot for your tank, and make sure that you're trying to get the most out of that slot. Which now brings me on to my second point, which is now bounty and bonded equipment. Once you go into the equipment tab, you will see that there is a standard and a special tab. If you click the special tab, you will then be shown with all of your bounty and bonded equipment down the bottom that you can choose from. This is not going to matter which slot you put any of these items in. Even if the bounty equipment is in its unupgraded state, it will not get the bonus. Which means that if you have a bounty rammer that is not upgraded and you put it in the firepower slot, it is not going to get a bonus. It is actually going to be worse than if you put a standard rammer in the firepower slot. However, it is going to be better than the standard rammer if you upgrade the bounty rammer. For example, vents provides a flat 5% bonus to all crew skills. If you put it in any of the slots, you get 6%. If you have a upgraded bounty ventilation, it is going to give you 7.5%. If this was not upgraded, you would only get 5%. Bond ventilation is going to give you 8.5% to all crew skills. And again, it doesn't matter what slot you put it in. You can see that these two are not changing. Not like when we had the ventilation here and we click it and you can see that it goes up to 6%. These two, doesn't matter which slot you put them in. Now, the way you get bounty equipment is from the battle pass. Now, the easiest way to do this for free is actually just to grind out the battle pass, and then you'll see here that you get a token when you reach level 20. So realistically, anyone can get bounty equipment if you just play enough. So you get one at level 20, you'll get one at level 25, and you'll get one at level 40. Once you have 3 tokens, you can then go into the items for tokens page, and down the bottom here, you can select your bounty equipment. And it can be any of these. So even free-to-play players, you can get your bounty equipment, and yes, it costs 3 million to upgrade it, which is quite a fair amount, to be fair. However, it's 100% worth it. The really nice thing about bounty equipment is that it costs either demount kits or gold to demount, whereas bond equipment costs bonds to demount. Now, bonds are scarcely available unless you have been playing for a very, very, very long time, in which case then you probably have quite a few just racked up on your account. But to get the bond equipment, you will need to go into the store, and you'll need to go down to the bottom, just below me, on the last tab, and you'll be entered into the bond store. Once you go up here to equipment, you will then see all the bond equipment that you can choose from and buy. Now, if you want to save 1,000 bonds, I recommend you grind up to 9,000, and then you can click Show All Bundles, and you'll see here the Combat Kit or the Specialist Kit. This gives you a Bond Vents and Bond Rammer for 9,000 bonds, and usually these are 5,000 each. So you can save 1,000 bonds through that way if you so choose. You could also choose the Bond Vents and Bond Stab. Unfortunately, there isn't Bond Stab and Bond Rammer, which I would actually prefer to have. But the other way is that you just go into the equipment and you just outright buy it. If you have enough bonds, they cost 5,000 each. Anyway, now that we've covered all of the basics for the equipment, we can now talk about class-specific equipment choices. For heavy tanks, you will always want HP unless it is a very specific tank. Now, obviously, the choice is going to be personal preference at the end of the day. However, let me explain why HP boost is so good on heavy tanks, especially for super heavy tanks. Not only does it just increase your hit points, and by HP boost, I mean improved hardening. That is what it's called in game, but we just call it HP boost for short. Not only will it increase your hit points in game, it is also going to increase your track health. And that is super important for heavy tanks. Because when you're trading, like in a 50B, even a 50B, where you think, well, you know, it doesn't really have armor, so there's no point of me really using HP boost, it is 100% worth it. Because your tracks will then take 2 or even 3 shots to be able to track you. Plus, with the HP boost, your track's repair time will be better and they get repaired to 100%. Which means that if you are tracked normally and the repair time's going up, it completes the repair, it gets put to 50%. If you use this, it gets put to the full 100% durability of whatever you had with the HP boost, and it increases it by 50%. Now, to demonstrate this, I am moving on to tanks.gg, which is an incredible resource if you are looking for just raw stats in the game to try and see how everything will work out when you equip your tanks. So here we can see that we can select HP boost and the track health goes up to 495 hit points instead of the basic 300, which means that no one's going to really first time track you unless they're using a stupidly high caliber gun firing HE. HE can still track you in the first shot. I'm going to do some proper testing though when we move on to the field mods video for that. And as you can see here under the repaired, so I actually misspoke earlier. I said that it was 50%. It's actually 75%. However, you will still get first time tracked regardless. So the actual repaired is going to go all up to 100% instead of the 75% base. As you can see here, the track health is 300, and after repair, it goes to 225. Whereas if we are using HP boost as we are, both of them are the exact same figure. You can also see the repair time goes down from 12 seconds to 10 seconds, which is actually quite a big difference in game. And then when you combine that, if you want to use a large repair kit, as well as then Brothers in Arms, and then you also have repair skill, it goes all the way down to 4.9 second repair time. Plus you can even use food to bring that down even lower, although it doesn't really make too much of a difference. You're not really going to notice that too much, at least usually. Now, one thing that I do want to mention is that for some reason, and I don't really know why, some tanks have more hit points on the tracks than others, even when you think that they should have more. For example, the AMX M454 has 300 track health, so does the 50B, But the 705A gets 250. And then it gets 190 when it's repaired, which is just abysmal. The same thing goes for the Super Conqueror. So HP boost is kind of 100% a must in those types of tanks, just to not get tracked in the first shot, because getting tracked is you getting killed most of the time as a heavy tank. So HP boost is really, really useful for basically every single heavy tank. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is modified configuration. Now, this will decrease the repair time down substantially, even more so than what the improved hardening would give you. Like, this is going to give you 15% more, as long as it's using the correct slot, than the improved hardening would. However, you do not gain the track health. So what config gives you is the ability to not get ammo racked or set on fire once. So not only does it increase the internal module durability, but it also makes sure that it is impossible for you to get ammo racked. Doesn't make it impossible for the ammo rack to get damaged, but it does make it impossible for the ammo rack to blow up. This only happens once. If you are the most unlucky person in the world and you get ammo racked twice in one game, then it will not save you. As you can see from the effect, it will stop one fuel tank fire, one ammo rack, and one engine destruction in the battle. This is super, super useful for tanks that actually do have a very, very weak ammo rack, like the 279, like the 60TP, the 705A, and you may find yourself choosing between HP boost and config. And if they do have a very weak ammo rack, the HP boost is just not going to be worth it to you, because what's worse, you getting tracked or blowing up with one shot. Now, one thing that I will mention is that you could go into directives and you could choose the shell organizer, which is going to increase the effectiveness of the safe stowage perk, which gives the ammo rack more durability, which makes it less likely that you are going to blow up. However, you still could, especially if it's a very, very weak ammo rack. Now, for the spool liner, honestly, don't bother. Like, I don't see the point of this even being in the game at the moment, because why would you ever choose spool liner over hardening? We know why you would choose modified configuration over hardening, but there is no point of choosing spool liner. It reduces HE damage, it reduces the chance that your crew is going to get injured by 60%, which is quite a lot, and it also reduces the stun and the additional stun that can be applied to your tank. However, it's not really useful. Most of the time when you get stunned, you just pop your medkit and then bang, you're back in the battle. And the HE shells, they already don't do as much damage as they used to, so there's no point of using this. In my opinion, the real choice for the heavy tank on the first slot, unless you 100% need the config, is between vents and hardening. And I would say 90% of the time, I'm choosing hardening, just to get that track health, because the track health is severely underrated in this game. Like, that track health will genuinely keep you alive more than vents ever would. Now, for the second slot, this is where it starts getting kind of tank dependent, because some tanks have much better stabilization on the gun than others. And I'm sure that if you are an experienced player, you know where I'm going with this. Stabs is a must on most tanks. If it doesn't bloom out as much, you will not need to aim as long and you will get more damage. It is as simple as that. In my opinion, stabs always goes in the last slot, because realistically, even if you put it in a firepower slot, it's only going to get 3 extra %, which you're not going to notice. So even if you use normal stabs, put it in the last slot, and that is going to help you out dramatically, which then frees up the middle slot. Remember, for heavy tanks, you can choose between firepower and mobility. If you are not on an autoloader, rammer. Rammer is a must. So on most tanks, you are going to be using HP boost, rammer, stabs. And that is what you will choose. However, for tanks that have more than enough stabilization, like the Super Conch, and you can again go to tanks.gg and look at the stats of it, and then decide on the tank that you are equipping if you can go without stabs or not, or just play a few games. And if you feel like you can play without stabs on it, then good on you, like whatever. But try out both is what I would say. You then go turbo. if you can choose it. Obviously, I have Bond Turbo in this, and then we have Rammer as the other one, both being Bond, so it doesn't matter what slot I put them in. But that is what you would usually go for. If you don't need stabs, HP, Turbo, Rammer. It's the best, it just works. If you don't need a turbo, like on the 50B, then choose vents, because the 50B is already fast enough. You don't need it to go any faster, unless you're playing Clan Wars, which is a completely different subject, and we don't need to go into that. But for randoms, just get vents. Just get vents, and then a stab, and that is a perfect setup. One thing that I see a lot of people do is put improved aiming unit instead of vents. Now, I don't know why people do this. Realistically, vents is going to give you a hell of a lot more than improved aiming unit is going to give you. For example, here we have the original setup. If we put improved aiming unit, we go down to 0.28. Everything else, you know, it's fine, whatever. However, if we choose vents, we go down to 0.29, but we get the bonuses to the reload, to the view range, to the terrain resistance. Even the repair speed of the suspension is going to go down as well using vents. So for 0.01 of dispersion, is it really worth it? I can guarantee you 100% you never, ever will see that 0.01 difference when you're playing the tank. And if you do, it is pure RNG that it's happened. Because remember, the accuracy in this game, it doesn't matter mostly what you use, because RNG is either going to give you insane luck or just insane bad luck. So for heavy tanks, the standard loadout is either vents or HP boost, rammer, stab. If you don't need a stab, then you can go with either vents or HP, turbo, rammer. Always use a rammer when you can. If you're on autoloaders, then you can use HP boost, vents, and stabs. Or if you don't need stabs, which is, I don't think, even a thing, to be honest, on all autoloaders. But if you didn't, then you could go with, I don't know, improved aiming or something. Like, it is really down to you at that point. Anyway, I know heavy tank section was really, really long, but the heavy tank section is kind of the most convoluted, and I see the most people mess up on. There's a lot of setups that I see people use, and I'm just... Your life would be 10 times easier if you just use the correct equipment. So we are now going to move on to medium tanks and then light tanks and tank destroyers. And they should be a hell of a lot faster because we've already spoke about most of what the equipment does. For medium tanks, you have the choice. Most of the time, it's going to be vents, rammer, stabs. Now, if you are a brawling type of player that really likes to go with the heavy tanks and, you know, you play those medium tanks that can actually brawl, you know, they've got some armor, and you love just side scraping and doing stuff like that and baiting shots with your tracks, use HP boost. But what you can do, if you have the last field mod, is choose the reinforced support rollers, and it will give you 30% durability to your suspension, which means that you have 114% extra durability with HP in the correct slot. And most of the medium tanks have 250 hit points on the tracks, so that 114% is going to be a lot for people to deal with. So that means that you can even side scrape in tanks that aren't as well armored because you can just bait the shots into the tracks. I mean, yes, you're going to have to be quite a decent player to do that, but you understand what I mean. But for everyone else, if you don't want to brawl, then I would just recommend you go with either turbo or vents, and then you get rammer stabs. And that applies for pretty much every single medium tank. You don't want to get too complicated with medium tanks, because most of the time, the standard vents, rammer, stabs is going to be best for you. And only in certain tanks, when it's already super fast, like the CS63, you could then put turbo to make it even faster. You know, if you already have one of the best stats in the game, why not make it even better? For tanks like the Leo 1, you can go stabless. You don't need stabs on the Leo 1. So you choose IAU, rammer, vents, and you get the ultimate accuracy and just general firepower. So medium tanks are a bit more complicated for setting them up, but for the equipment choices, it's not as complicated as heavy tanks. Just make sure that you have a little look on tanks.gg and you can properly get into like the nitty gritty of all the stats and stuff like that, and then find out what you want to use and test them out, see what works. Now for the tank destroyers, this is pretty straightforward because you either have two different types. You have the assault tank destroyers and the kind of sniping tank destroyers. The assault being Jagdpanzer 100, Object 268V4, E3, and then you have the snipers like the Guerrilla 15, STRV 103B. With the Jagdpanzer being an assault TD, and I'd recommend this for every single assault TD, rammer, HP, and vents. That's what you want. You could put the vents in the first slot if you wanted to, if you want to not really use DPM as much and get everything else a little bit better, which is probably what I would do, to be honest, if I didn't have bounty. But for tank destroyers that are snipers, like on the Guerrilla 15, and obviously the Guerrilla 15 being an open top vehicle, you can't put vents on it, which is something I forgot to say, but it doesn't matter too much. You put the rammer, you either choose vents or rammer, depending on if you can choose it. And then you can put low noise exhaust, as you can choose the scouting ability in the second slot, and then either choose vents, or you could even choose the improved aiming, IAU. It doesn't really matter too much what you choose, just lots of different options when it comes to the sniper TD. But if you are going to be sitting at the back of the map in a bush, I would recommend you get either vents, rammer, depending, and then the low noise exhaust, because that is going to give you plus 6% concealment when it's in the correct slot. And then for the last slot is either vents, or you could switch it with the rammer like I showed you on the Jagdpanzer. So tank destroyers, quite simple. I wouldn't really recommend anything other than that. There's no real need for gun lane drives anymore in this game, unless you are using something like an FV4005, in which case it's actually kind of useful, because this thing is just a meme machine. So you could then use vents, gun lane drive, and an IRM, and forgo the rammer on tanks like this, because they are just a one shot, and then you're reloading for like 30 seconds or 20 seconds anyway. So, but for tanks like the Jagdpanzer, it plays a lot different because it is an assault tank. It has armor sometimes, but you do want to have the rammer on the Jagdpanzer. Now for light tanks, very, very simple actually. The first slot, CVS. What's CVS? Commander's Vision System. It's the most stupid thing that they've ever added to the game. Now the way this thing works is that if a enemy is camping and, you know, scouting from a bush, it is going to minus their camo rating by 20%. Which means that if they are sitting in a bush, let's say 30% camo, and they only have 20% camo, although that's unlikely, you know, it's going to be a light tank, so probably around about 40% camo. They're only going to have 20% camo behind that bush, which makes it a lot easier for you to spot as long as you have good view range. And if you want a full view range guide, I do have one. I'll link it in the description. So CVS kind of ruins light tanks when they're sitting in bushes, and I don't agree that this ever should have been added to the game. No one asked for this, okay? Just like a lot of the things, no one asked for this equipment choice to be added to the game, and it does kind of... It removes some of the skill from scouting and knowing about bushes and whatnot, at least in my opinion. But for the second slot, you get the choice between, obviously, mobility and firepower. Probably choose firepower, and then just go vents. And then in the final one, you want optics. The reason that you don't put optics in the first one is because CVS is just way too important. On light tanks, you're already going to have good view range usually, and past a certain point, the CVS is actually a lot more beneficial to you than optics is. So you combine that with, you know, 500 meters view range with CVS, that's going to be a lot of camo reduction when you're actually looking at enemy light tanks. Obviously, if you can, choose bounty stuff, as it's going to help you out a lot. The only other equipment choice that you could choose is to ditch the vents and then go with low noise exhaust. But you're probably going to want to have that as bounty so that it gets, you know, the full bonus, because you don't have that slot bonus anymore. And for SPGs, Yep, enjoy just clicking me from the back of the map. So I hope this was useful. This took me a very long time, and now my throat hurts because I've been speaking for about 55 minutes, actually more than that. So well over an hour now. I've just been talking to myself in my room. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, then you know what to do, and hopefully this was useful to you. Let me know down below if I've missed anything, because I probably have. And yeah, let me know what you use. Thanks for watching. I'll see you all in the next one.